The Dark type, a type that is popular amongst fans due to their exceptional designs. However, despite all these cool looking Pokemons, they don't really have any eye-popping stats or very strong type interactions that puts them ahead of others. They instead rely on their attacks and cohesion as a dual typing that allows them to propel in combat. So how elusive is the Dark type when it comes to battle? Let's take a closer look at Dark, the type disguised by the numbers. Let's start by looking at the introduction of the Dark type. It was released in the second generation to balance the types by being immune to psychic type attacks. Alongside this, it was super effective against 2 types and able to resist 2 types. On the other hand, it had 3 weaknesses and is also resisted by 3 types. And prior to Fairy's existence, it had 2 weaknesses and was resisted by Steel instead. This leads to Dark being a somewhat non-reactive type. And since it shares similarities with the Ghost typing, that being that these two are super effective against the same Pokemons, allows for a lot of substitutions between them. Overall, nothing really stands out when looking at its type properties, so we need to look at something else to see what a Dark type distinguishes itself as unique. So what about the growth of Dark type Pokemons over time? Has it become stronger and more noticeable? We'll start at Kanto, where no regular form Dark type Pokemon exist, allowing Dark type to have a particular record of being the only type to not have any representation in any generation of Pokemon. Even Steel and Fairy had some involvement in Kanto, despite not being released in that generation either, with Magnemite and Magneton gaining the Steel typing, and a few Pokemon either gaining the Fairy typing or completely changing to Mono Fairy. Anyways, onto Johto, the actual release of Dark types that introduced 6 Pokemons, with one of them being Tyranitar, which despite being over 20 years old, it still remains today as having the second largest base stat total of all Dark type Pokemon. This group of Dark type Pokemon released in Johto had an average base stat of 465, which was really good at the time, seeing that in Generation 2 the average base stat amongst all Pokemons was 407. This allowed Dark type to place third on being the type with the highest average base stat total in Johto, only behind a newly introduced Steel, which was covered in my last video, so if you're interested in that, go check it out, and Dragon, who just had Kingdra. In the next generation of Hoenn, the Dark type saw the singular weakest set of Pokemons, where 10 Pokemons were released, who surmounted to a base stat average of 401. This is the lowest average base stat total the Dark type ever received in any region. On top of that, it was also the only region, excluding for Kanto, that didn't release a Dark type Pokemon who has a base stat total of at least 500. This weak set of Pokemons was even witnessed in competitive, as no Dark type Pokemon that were released in Hoenn were used enough to place in the UU, which is underused, for Ruby and Sapphire. Sinnoh's up next, introducing 7 Pokemon that are relatively powerful, resulting in the average Dark type base stat in this generation to reach 487. And with Weavile and Darkrai being tied as the fastest Pokemon in Sinnoh, they also help Dark type lead against all other types on being the fastest, with the average Sinnoh Dark type having a speed stat of 87. We then move on to Unova. I mentioned for Hoenn that the 3rd generation of Pokemon had the weakest set of Dark Pokemon. However, Gen 5 had the worst set of Dark type Pokemon. Unova released the most amount of Dark type Pokemon in a singular generation at 16. And this may play a factor into why they were statistically the worst compared to previous and future set of Dark type Pokemon. This region Dark type had an average base stat of 412, which is only higher than Hoenn. However, Unova was the region where Dark type had the lowest average ranking in all statistical category compared to other types in its respective region, thus coinciding with my initial statement of Unova releasing the worst set of Dark type Pokemons ever. Kalos comes afterwards trying to salvage the type by releasing 5 Dark type Pokemons, one of which is still currently the strongest Dark type Pokemon in the entire franchise, in Yveltal. The average base stat of these 5 Dark type reached 495, which is a new high, but this record gets absolutely shattered when looking at the next generation of Alola, where Dark reaches its highest average base stat at 550. However, this was achieved since Alola only released 2 Dark type Pokemons, that being the fan favorite Incineroar and the Ultra Beast Guzzlord. These 2 chunky Pokemons allow Dark to lead all types in highest average HP and highest average base stat total for Generation 7. We then get to Galar, another pretty underwhelming release of Dark type Pokemons, although that just might be because of there being a first route Dark type Pokemon, similar to what we saw in Hoenn and Unova, that brings the type averages down. In Galar, 10 Dark type Pokemons were introduced to the series that had an average base stat total of 446. It's not bad, but it's not great either. And finally, we get to Paldea, where it receives the greatest influx of strong Pokemons. 13 Dark types were released, with many of them being either Paradoxes or a Treasure of Ruin Pokemon. This allowed Dark types to have an average base stat of 528, which was the 3rd highest in Paldea, only behind Dragon and Fighting. These Pokemons led to the Dark type having the highest average rankings in all statistical categories in its history, where it ranked in the top 6 for almost all stats, when compared to other types in Paldea. And with all these Pokemons added together, it causes Dark-type Pokemon to on average have a base stat total of 460. But with the plethora of regional Dark-type Pokemons existing, the average is further decreased to 452. Still fairly high, as this would allow Dark to have the 5th highest base stat average when in comparison to all types. However, when looking at final stage Pokemons only, it falls to being the 7th strongest with a stat total of 515. Still a respectable score, but not very dominant. Also, the amount of Dark-type Pokemons being released has been increasing over the years as well, but this is to be expected since it had a slow start of being one of the least common type after 2 generations of Pokemon, and with dual typing becoming more common over the years. This allows the rate at which Dark-type Pokemons are seen in the Pokédex from about 2% when looking at the first 251 Pokemons released to now almost 7%, where 69 out of 1025 Pokemons are Dark-type. And when we add regional forms as well, with their high abundance of 11 out of 65 regional forms being associated with a Dark type, we see that 7.4% of all Pokemon has this typing. So how does the Dark type distinguish itself from others despite its mediocre stat total and basically non-reactive type properties? Well, simply put, the Dark type doesn't rely on itself when it comes to typing. Instead, it blends in with the type it's paired up with. It also has access to moves and effects that play a huge role in battle, despite not seeming that insane on paper. And its stats are subdivided further to mainly 2 categories. So which of these stats do Dark type thrive in? Simply just attack and speed, where when in comparison to all Pokemon of all types, 37% of all stats belonging to Dark type Pokemon are distributed to either one of these 2 categories, allowing it to place second amongst all types on average allocation on physical sweeping stats, only behind the high attack stat merchant fighting. This high concentration of stats also allows for 38 out of 52 final stage Dark type Pokemon to have a higher physical sweeping score than the average final stage Pokemon, which is valued at 172, really helping them play a role when in competitive play by taking up the role of being a sweeper or revenge killer, but more on that soon. Let's first get into Dark type favorable dual typings. In Wolfie's video about all possible type combination, the 3 lowest ranked Dark combinations were Dark Psychic, Dark Normal, and Dark Bug. Luckily, players don't have to worry too much about these horrible combinations, as each of them only see 1 instance of use amongst final stage Dark type Pokemons. If we include for alternative forms, Hoopa Unbound also makes an appearance for Dark Psychic. But nonetheless, not many Dark type Pokemon are restricted by their typings, especially when the top 3 Dark combination has such a large pool of Pokemon selections, that being Dark Poison, Dark Fire, and Dark Water, in which there exist 11. This equals to over a quarter of all dual type final stage Dark Pokemons having a phenomenal typing. The Dark typing works well with these types as all of them gain super effective coverage against types they didn't previously have. They also all get the resistance to Dark and Ghost, which they didn't have before either, and now no longer take neutral or super effective damage from opposing Psychic type attacks. All in all, allowing the Dark type to perfectly pair up with these types. Now let's look at Dark type moves, one of Dark's greatest assets. The Dark type has 2 main moves that are used for damage, those being Crunch for physical attackers and Dark Pulse for special attackers. Crunch allows for a chance to decrease opposing Pokemon's defense, which can allow for any following crunches or any physical attacks in general to deal more damage. Dark Pulse allows for a chance to flinch and completely skip the opposing Pokemon's turn. This of course is good since Dark types are inherently fast as a whole. It also has a small set of exclusive moves, which I don't really feel like explaining. I'd rather focus on 3 Dark type moves that are very commonly seen, despite these attacks consisting of 1 status move and 2 moves that don't have the same base power as the previously mentioned Crunch. I would like to call these moves the Dark Triad, which consists of Knock Off, Sucker Punch, and Taunt. All 3 of these moves are associated with the Dark type, and all of them have a sinister effect that takes something away from the opponent. Taunt takes away status moves, Knock Off removes their items, and gets a damage boost to turn it removes an item, and Sucker Punch allows you to steal priority and get the first hit. Of course, they all have some type of limitation, but these effects can bring great value to your team if pulled off correctly, and it's practically why you will almost always see at least one of these moves used in competitive Pokemon. So let's get into how effective Dark type Pokemon are when it comes to the competitive aspect of Pokemon. Let's quickly start by looking at Megas. The Dark type had 6, which is more than the average type, consisting of Mega Gyarados, Mega Houndoom, Mega Tyranitar, Mega Sableye, Mega Sharpedo, and Mega Absol. Most of them didn't perform well as other options existed which were clearly better. Out of them, only Gyarados, Tyranitar, and Sableye saw some real usage. Tyranitar is a pseudo-legendary hitting 700 base stat that sets up Sandstorm, but it still has a quad weakness to fighting that could still allow it to be one-hit KO'd. Gyarados is a demon, thanks to its pre-evolution ability Intimidate and access to the move Dragon Dance. It also loses its quadruple weakness to Electric upon Mega Evolution, However, it's much slower than Greninja, a Pokemon who shares the exact same typing, which is a perfect substitute for Mega Gyarados that doesn't require a stone. And finally Sableye, who now has insane bulk, alongside an ability to protect itself from status move and access to the move Recover, allowing this gremlin to be used on many style teams. It was so annoying that it got banned from OU to Ubers in the X and Y games. Then some changes brought it back down to OU and Sun and Moon. But what about all the other dark type Pokemon? How successful are they in competitive battles due to their move stats and typing? Just know the data collected for this part is from Pikalytics and was extracted February 9th, 2025. Pokemon's usages could have increased or decreased from when you are watching this video. In Little Cup, a format that involves only first stage Pokemon that are capable of evolving, two Pokemon absolutely dominate in terms of usage rate, that being Mienfoo and Vullaby. Both have an over 60% usage rate. No other Pokemon in this format even hits a usage rate of 40%. Now, I assume you have basic Pokemon knowledge, or else you wouldn't even be watching this video. Of these two Pokemon, only Vullaby is Dark type. Mienfoo is Mono Fighting. Yet when looking at both of their moveset, the most commonly seen attacking move is Knockoff. The reason for this is because every single Pokemon that could be used in this tier can wield Eviolite, one of the most powerful items in the franchise that isn't exclusive to a select few Pokemons. In fact, out of the top 10 most used Pokemons in Little Cup, none of them has their most used item be Eviolite, with the only exception being Diglett having the Life Orb, because Diglett's defense is already awful. And of these top 10, 4 of them has Knockoff in their moveset to counter it, allowing the presence of the Dark type to play a big role in Little League. Let's look at more formats. Monotype, a metagame where a team is fully compromised of a singular type. In this format, the Dark type is a typing with the 4th highest usage for a complete roster. The only types to have a higher usage rate were Dragon, Flying, and Steel. And the reason those types were ahead of Dark is they were given either high stats, wonderful versatility, or great typing. And of these top 6 most used Dark types in Monotype format, 4 of them involves at least one of the Dark Triad moves in their moveset. Greninja had Dark Pulse, although its typing isn't that relevant since it does have Protein, which can allow it to change from its Dark typing and somewhat bypass the Monotype ruling. And Tinglu, it's just there to be a tank that sets up Stealth Rock and Spikes. In the OU tier, it's the second type to see a repeat in usage only after Steel. When looking at OU doubles, it's the first type to see a repeat in usage, with both Qianpao and Incineroar being in the top 4 for most used Pokemons in OU doubles. Although this has a lot to do with the individual Pokemons themselves, having abilities that cripples both opposing Pokemons either offensively or defensively. But both of them do use a move from the Dark Triad. Furthermore, Incineroar absolutely dominates in VGC, but let's speak about Dark type in Ubers first. Unlike the previously mentioned metagames, the Dark type absolutely reeks in the Uber tier, as this is where all the big strong Pokemons linger around. The thing is that Dark doesn't really have any of them in the current Uber metagame. Out of all Dark type Pokemon with a base stat of 600 or higher, Hydreigon, Zarude, and Tyranitar all suffer from a quadruple weakness. Yveltal, an absolute demon, doesn't exist in the Scarlet and Violet games, so it can't be used in the Uber meta. This leaves only Darkrai, the only possible savior for the Dark type in Uber, with its high speed and special attack stat, alongside a unique attack in Dark Void that has a chance to apply sleep at 80%. Applying even further damage with the ability Bad Dreams can surely allow it to thrive in this tier. This strategy was kinda killed a decade ago when Dark Void got nerfed to 50% accuracy, causing Darkrai to become utterly useless in Ubers. With the lack of strong Dark Pokemon to compete with other legendaries in the same tier, paired with the fact that the top 2 most used Pokemon in Ubers are those that are deadly physical sweepers that are super effective against Dark, leads to Dark type only having one appearance in the top 25 most usages in Uber. That sole Pokemon being King Gambit, who has an insane attack stat when paired with the ability to find Overlord. And it's also able to bypass its own lack of speed with Sucker Punch. All in all, putting Dark type in a very bad spot for the Ubers format. Now finally, we look at the VGC format. In particular, 2024 best of 3 regulation showdowns, in all 3 sets of Set F, Set G, and Set H. And just for those who don't know, this format is a doubles battle, not a single. The Pokemon with the highest usage rate in all 3 of these was the infamous Incineroar, simply because it brings the widest range of support for any singular Pokemon. All 3 of these versions of Incineroar run the exact same set of moves. It has nice bulk to be able to tank attacks, also has a top 3 typing achievable by Dark type. This allows it to be immune to both burn and moves affected by Prankster, with a large array of resistances. Can lower opposing Pokemon's attack every time it enters the field with Intimidate, can stun opponent Pokemons with Fake Out, further lower their attacking stats while switching out with Parting Shot, is commonly paired with the item Safety Goggles to make it unaffected by Spore and uninfluenced by Rage Powder, can remove opponent's item with Knockoff, and a good enough attack stat for the times it does need to attack with Flare Blitz, making Incineroar a staple of any team in Pokemon VGC. But what do you guys think? Does the Dark type need a buff in its interaction against other types to help it be more distinctive, or will it continuously rely on the benefit it receives from other types that is paired up with, alongside the underhanded effects by the moves they are able to learn, to constantly be used for covert strategies, and forever remain a type disguised by the numbers?